Hey everyone, how are you doing? I hope everyone's been having a really good week. So for this week, I thought we could talk a little bit about accountability in the workplace. A lot of us have jobs, a lot of us are looking to get jobs, and a lot of us will be going back to work here very, very soon. So today we'll talk a little bit about what accountability is in the workplace. So to kind of start off, I want to talk about us to think about the word accountability. What does that really mean to be accountable? Maybe to be accountable to yourself, being accountable to your family, to your friends, and then in the workplace, being accountable to your coworkers and to your boss. Accountability is, when we look at accountability and define that word, it means it's owning your own actions. It's owning your actions, whether they're good actions or whether they're bad actions. It's taking that time to care about the quality of your work, the quality of your words and your language, your professionalism, and your actions, all while you're at work. When we think about being accountable, it's also being willing to admit when we've made mistakes. It's also that responsibility of taking responsibility for our mistakes, and then very importantly, making sure that we're learning from those mistakes. How accountable we are depends on our situation and the values that we hold. Being accountable, though, can make a really big difference in how other people see us and, most importantly, how we see ourselves. So if we have good accountability, that helps us make our relationships better, and it can help us feel better about ourselves, too. So I'm going to ask you a few questions, and after the questions, I'd like for you to pause the video so you can take some time to answer those. The first question I have is, what does accountability mean to you? Next, what does it mean something different? Does accountability mean something different at home than at work or when you're in the community? And what is the best thing about being accountable? And my last question is, why can it be hard to be held accountable? When we think about accountability, we want to also think about why that's important. Accountability isn't about what we do, it's about taking responsibility for what we do. It can be easier to own our own actions when everything's going well and everything's going right and we're doing everything we're supposed to, because then we can be proud of saying or doing something that made a situation better. Accountability can be harder, though, when we have to think about how we can be accountable for maybe a mistake that we've made. It's not easy to say, I said or did something that made this situation worse. And sometimes it's kind of hard to tell. Did we help that situation? Did we hurt that situation? What seems small to us can be a really big deal to other people and other coworkers and even our boss or other people in our lives. So I have a little bit of an example. Here we have Clara. Clara works in the morning. She works a morning shift at a coffee shop. Her job is to open the shop up and prepare the drinks and pastries for her customers. The shop opens every morning at 6:30, but Clara sometimes doesn't get to work until about 6:45. It's only 15 minutes after opening, but when that happens, customers are often waiting outside the shop, or they've given up because they're upset and they've left. When her boss asks Clara why she's late, she always has an excuse. The bus was late, her alarm didn't go off, or she couldn't find her uniform. So I have some questions for you about Clara. And again, I'd like you to pause the video after the questions so you have some time to talk about them. The first question I have for you, do you think Clara is accountable? Next question, what do you think her customers would say? Her boss? Her coworkers? Next question, would you want to work with Clara? Why or why not? And our last question about Clara, do you think Clara's accountability will affect her success at this job? What about her next job? When we think about accountability, we also have to think a little bit about our values. If you know what your values are, it's easier to be accountable. When we have values, those values guide us. They guide us how we live our lives. They're the things that are important to us. We use our values every day to make important decisions, whether that's at work or at home. But what do values have to do with that accountability? Accountability to others changes depending on our situation, depending on the situation that we're in or maybe that we are going to be in. But accountability to ourselves always stays the same. So remember, we talked about what accountability was. Accountability is owning our own actions, both the good actions and the bad. And it's really caring about that quality of work and admitting to our mistakes, taking responsibility for our mistakes, and learning from those mistakes. So when you're accountable to yourself, you're saying, I care about how I act. I care about how I act, and it's important to me. I owe it to myself to be the best that I can be. What we think of as the best we can be is different for each and every one of us. The best that we can be changes depending on what our values are. So when we think about different values, some of our values might be caring for other people, doing the best job that we can do, maybe being creative, making the world a better place, being honest, taking care of our family, our friends, being smart with our money. There's so many different values that we all have, and each and every one of us is different. That's why accountability can sometimes be a little complicated. Because if accountability were easy, we'd all be really good at it. But we all struggle with accountability sometimes. Sometimes our values conflict with each other. And sometimes they conflict with the values of other people and other coworkers that are in our lives. So being accountable in those situations can become a little bit complicated. So let's kind of look at an example of that. This time we're going to talk a little bit about Ryan. Ryan works at a grocery store. He stocks the shelves in the evening, and he does a really good job. Two of Ryan's values are working hard and not wasting anything. He sees a lot of waste, however, at the grocery store, and it kind of drives him crazy. Sometimes Ryan notices that cans are dented, or maybe the packages are torn, or boxes are a little bent. He knows that his manager will tell him to throw the damaged cans away, so he takes them home instead. They're still good food, and not wasting is really important to him. When his boss sees him putting damaged cans in his bag one day, she gets pretty upset. She asks him why he's stealing. Ryan doesn't know what to say. So, let's think about that. I have a few questions that I want you to kind of think about and talk about. So again, after the question, please pause the video so you can have some time to talk about it. My first question for you is, how do you think Ryan would describe his accountability? And what do you think his boss would say? Next question. What advice would you give Ryan for this conversation that he's going to have with his boss? My last question about Ryan, what do you think Ryan could have done to avoid this situation? So we always want to make sure that we're accountable at work. That's what your boss, that's what your coworkers want, and of course, that's what you want. But being accountable is more than just wanting. You have to do it. You have to act. And that means sometimes putting yourself out there. So we've talked about what accountability is, and again, that's where we're owning our actions, the good and the bad. We are willing to admit when we have mistakes, take responsibility for those mistakes, and again, learn from those mistakes. So to be accountable to other people, we need to know a few things. So one of those things that we kind of need to know is, what kind of quality of work do they want from you? What do they expect? What are your true expectations when you're on the job? And, importantly, how do they think that you're doing? Our boss and our coworkers don't always tell us. So to get those answers, we need to be able to be comfortable in asking some of those questions. And the important part is, we need to be able to listen to get those answers. So we have Manuel. Manuel works at a call center for a very large bank. He works hard to be very polite to his customers, and he works really hard to solve their issues. Jane is one of his coworkers, and she sits right behind him. She isn't as polite with her customers. She rushes through the calls and tries to get as many done as she can. Their boss praises Jane for handling more calls than Manuel, but doesn't seem to care about her rudeness. So Manuel really starts to wonder if he's going about his job all wrong. So here's a couple questions about Manuel. Again, pause after the questions so you have a little time to talk about it. When Manuel talks to his boss, what questions do you think he could ask his boss to get some feedback on what his expectations are? And the next question, what do you think Manuel should do next? Accountability is kind of tricky because sometimes you're the only one who knows what actions you're taking. It might seem like your poor accountability won't affect anyone but you. But that's not always the case. That might be where your actions are easy to brush off and you don't have to really worry about them. But how your accountability affects you is very important, and how your accountability can really affect your well-being. So here I have another person we're going to meet. Her name is Maxine. Last month, Maxine's boss asked her to take on a special project, and she's been ignoring it. Whenever he comes by, she pretends to be working on it. When he asks her about it, she says, "It's going really well." She figures she could get it done before he asks to see it at the end of the month. But now she's not so sure. So Maxine is starting to get more and more anxious. So my question about Maxine, how do you think Maxine's poor accountability is going to affect her well-being? And how is it going to affect the other people she works with? When we're looking at accountability, we all have setbacks, and sometimes those setbacks happen with our accountability. We get tempted to do something that we know is wrong. We don't want to admit that we've made a mistake, and we don't think we have something important to learn from our mistakes. Or we think whatever we might need to learn is not as important as telling ourselves and everyone else that we did the right thing. So, meet Mike. Mike is a personal support worker at his local hospital, and his job is very rewarding. But it can also be very tiring and very stressful. There's a lot to do, and it feels like everything's important. On the busiest day, Mike sometimes takes shortcuts to help get his work done. He might rush one client to the bathroom instead of taking his time. He might check on one patient once a shift instead of doing it every hour. He might skim a nurse's notes instead of reading them all the way through. He knows he's not doing what his boss and coworkers expect from him, but what can he do? It's not his fault that there's too much work and not enough time. So, again, pause after these questions. What do you think of Mike's reasons for taking shortcuts? Are they good reasons? Next question, are they worth not being accountable to the people that depend on him? And my last question, what advice would you give to Mike? There's lots of strategies that are there for us to be able to help us be accountable at work. And we all know that we all want to be accountable and we all want to do what we can do. So, what can you do to help yourself? I want you to remember these few strategies. So remember, these will help you to be more accountable. Always do your best. We always want to work our hardest every single day. Ask questions. If you're not sure, ask. Listen to others. Listening is always key. Admit your mistakes. Everybody makes them, and just make sure you admit to them. Make sure you change your behavior. If you've learned from your mistakes, you'll change it. And lastly, always think positive. I hope this was very helpful for you, and I can't wait to talk to you about it more. I hope you have a great week. We'll see you all soon. Bye.